men. In 1870, an engineer by the name of John Roebling had a dream. His dream was this. He wanted to build a bridge across the East River from Manhattan to Brooklyn. As he brought that dream forward, everyone said it was impossible. They said the currents were too strong. The distance, they said, was too great. The technology had not yet arrived to complete such a task. And yet, Roebling believed it could be done. He convinced his son, Washington, to join him in this dream. And they began to work tirelessly to make this happen. And then tragedy struck. On site, on the construction site, John Roebling was killed. Not long after that, going down deep to the piers, Washington Roebling was injured so severely that he was paralyzed. He could not walk. He could not talk. He only had the use of one finger. People said the dream was over. But Washington refused to quit. Unable to speak, unable to walk, he used that one functioning finger and he tapped letters into words for messages to his wife, Emily. She took those messages to the construction workers. And through that, for 11 years, she carried out those instructions to those workers. The world watched in disbelief, but Emily trusted her husband. The workers, they trusted Emily. And Washington trusted his vision. And in 1883, the Brooklyn Bridge was opened. Church, it was a monument to perseverance, to partnership, but also to trust. You know, this story reminds us that love builds what others say is impossible. Love believes when others doubt. Love always trusts. We're doing a study in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 of agape love, the love that seeks the highest good of another. And this morning we come to Paul's words, love always trusts. If you have your Bible, let's read this section from 1 Corinthians. We're going to start in chapter 12, verse 31. And now I will show you the most excellent way, Paul says. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship, that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. Love keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but it rejoices in the truth. Love always protects. Love always trusts. Paul is writing these words to a church in a city called Corinth. Corinth was a wealthy port city full of merchants and sailors and travelers and traders. It was known for its immorality. It was known for its competition. It was known for its self-promotion. People in Corinth trusted money, status, pleasure, but rarely trusted each other. Relationships were fragile. Commitments were shallow. Promises in Corinth were often broken. The Corinthian church reflected the culture of that city. We've been studying this. There were divisions. There were lawsuits. There was jealousy. There was distrust. There was spiritual pride. And so when Paul wrote, love always trusts, he's not offering some poetic line. I mean, he is confronted and he is confronting a broken culture. Love always trusts. He's saying agape love, real love, is not suspicious. Real love is not cynical. Real love chooses trust, even in a world that's full of betrayal. We've been looking each week at the Greek words behind our study. We know the Greek word for love is agape. It seeks the highest good of another. We have seen also in the past that the word always is the word panta in the Greek. It means consistent. It means in all things. It means at all times. And the word trust, pisteo, means to believe, to place confidence in, to rely upon. In fact, pisteo comes from the same Greek root word for faith. So Paul is saying this: love chooses to believe the best. Love chooses to lean toward trust, not suspicion. I mean, love gives confidence instead of doubt. Now, that doesn't mean, and we all know this, it doesn't mean that love is gullible. It means that love is hopeful. It's faith-filled. Love is confident in God's work in people. This love trusts God's character. It trusts God's promises. It trusts God's ability to redeem you and redeem me. It trusts God's working in other people's lives. Love, trust. So when you say all this, you say, well, Jeff, it sounds like love is rooted in faith. Whenever you say love, trust, and that's exactly right. This morning, let's look, if you have your bulletin, open it up. I'm just going to give you 3 simple points to take with you that I think are life-changing points from this idea that Paul gives us, that love, trust. Point number 1 I'd like for you to write down is this: love trusts God even when life doesn't make sense. I mean, you and I know there's going to be moments in every life when what God is doing simply does not make sense to us. I mean, you prayed and nothing changed. You tried to do the right things, But things, they got worse. You trusted God, but that door still closed in your face. You thought you understood where your life was going, and then what happened? Suddenly, everything changed. It is at moments like this for you and I that trust becomes so much more than some word. I mean, think about this. It's true. It's easy to trust God when everything is going our way. Trust becomes faith when things are not going our way. The psalmist said this in Psalms 56:3. When I'm afraid, I put my trust in you. Now notice what David does not say. David does not say, if I am afraid. David says, when I'm afraid. Faith does not mean you and I never experience fear. Faith means this: fear does not get the final word in our lives. Think about Abraham. What a great story. Abraham. Trust without knowing. That's Abraham. The Hebrew writer tells us this in Hebrews 11:8. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. I mean, think about this. God essentially told Abraham, leave what you know, leave what is familiar, leave what feels secure, and follow me, Abraham. You know, Abraham didn't receive a map. He didn't have GPS. He just received a promise from God. I don't know about you, but so many times I want God to answer some questions for me. God, where are we going? How long, God, is this going to take? You ever ask questions like that? God, how is this going to work out? God, what happens next? And sometimes God's answer to us is simply this: trust me. The writer of Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6 says this: trust in the Lord with all of your heart, lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Look at the contrast. Trust in God and don't lean on your understanding. Why? Because there's going to be moments in your understanding and God's direction, and they're not going to seem to agree at all. They're going to disagree. When you think about stories in the Old Testament, one of my favorite on this topic is Joseph. I mean, here is Joseph, the Joseph of Genesis. He receives a dream from God. His jealous brothers throw him into a pit, an empty cistern. He's sold into slavery. There he is falsely accused of an act he did not commit, and then he is thrown in prison and he is forgotten. I don't know about you, but if I'm Joseph, I might be thinking this: God has abandoned me. He's abandoned me. But God was doing something Joseph could not see. Years later, Joseph even tells his brothers this. In Genesis 50, verse 20, he says this: you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Now notice what Joseph doesn't say. He doesn't say what happened was good. He says God was able to bring good out of it. That, for everyone in this room, that's an important distinction. Christian faith does not require you and I to call tragedy good. It doesn't call us to do that. In fact, it allows us to say, This is painful. This is unfair. This is not what I wanted. But I still believe God is at work. Romans 8:28, Paul tells the church at Rome that. And we know that in all things God works for good for those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. It doesn't say all things are good. It says God works in all things for good. Some of you here this morning may be living in the middle of a story like Joseph right now. Right now. You haven't reached Genesis 50 yet. You're back in chapter 37. You're in the pit. You're in the jail cell. You're in the prison. You're still waiting. And maybe the message you need today is not a message of explanation. Maybe you need this. Don't confuse God's silence with God's absence. You may not understand what God is doing. You may not see where the road is taking you. You may not know how this chapter is going to end, but you know this. You know the character of the one who is writing your story. And that makes all the difference. Love trusts God's heart, even when you and I cannot trace God's hand. Secondly, write this down. Love trusts people enough to give them a chance. This may be actually the most challenging part of this verse, because trusting God is one thing, but trusting people, church, that's a whole nother thing. I mean, let's be honest. People disappoint us. People break promises. People make mistakes. Sometimes people deeply hurt us. So when Paul says in the Revised Standard Version of 1 Corinthians 13, love believes all things, he's not saying ignore warning signs, pretend sin doesn't exist, stay in dangerous relationships, trust someone who continually deceives you. He doesn't say that. Biblical love is not gullible. In fact, remember just one verse, we said it the last 2 weeks. Love does not delight in evil, verse 6 from 1 Corinthians 13, but it rejoices with the truth. So love never requires you and I to deny truth. Instead, Paul is doing this. Now listen to me. He is describing the posture of our hearts. Our hearts. Where is your heart on this? See, agape love does not automatically assume the worst about someone. Agape love doesn't interpret every mistake as malicious. Agape love does not spend its life looking for reasons to distrust people. In fact, I'm going to encourage you to write this down. This is really good. Agape love gives people room to become more than they have been. Let me say that again. Agape love gives people room to become more than they have been. One of the greatest examples of that we can find in the Bible, it's in the book of Acts. In Acts chapter 13, John Mark is traveling with Paul and Barnabas. They're on a missionary journey. And in Acts 13:13, we get these words. From Paphos, Paul and his companions sailed to Perga and Pamphylia, where John left them to return to Jerusalem. This is John Mark. And John Mark leaves them. We're not told why. Maybe he was afraid. Maybe he was homesick. Maybe this mission work was harder than he expected. whatever reason, John Mark, he quits. Now later, Barnabas wants to give him another opportunity. In Luke chapter 15, it says this: Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, with them, but Paul did not think it wise to take him because he had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued to work with them in the work. Paul remembered Mark's failure. But Barnabas, he saw Mark's potential. Barnabas, in effect, said this: let's give him another chance. And so Barnabas takes Mark with him, and thank God that he did. Because years later, Paul is about to die. He's about to be executed. It's the end of his life. And he writes Timothy with these words. Look at this, church. Only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, because he is helpful to me in my ministry. Church, don't miss this. The man Paul once refused to take as he's about to die is the man Paul requests to be with him. Somebody believed in Mark long enough for Mark to become the man God intended him to be. I mean, what if Barnabas had to find Mark by his worst moment? What if Barnabas had said, you quit once, you'll quit again. You failed us, you're unreliable, we're finished with you. We might have lost the gospel of Mark. People need someone who sees more. There are people in our lives who desperately, right now, in your life, who desperately need a Barnabas. Someone who says, I know what you did, but I also know what God can do. I wouldn't be standing in this pulpit if I didn't have people like that in my life. Some of them are in this room. I was a John Mark. I failed. But I had Barnabases in my life. I call them earthly angels who believed that my worst moment did not define me. Let me say this. That doesn't mean that trust happens immediately. I understand. It has to be rebuilt. Forgiveness happens immediately. Reconciliation takes time. We need honesty, repentance, consistent behavior. I mean, Jesus wants us to be wise. In Matthew 10:16, he says this when he sent the disciples out: I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves, therefore be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. He wants grace, but he wants wisdom with that. But here's the question of the heart. This is your question this morning. It's my question. Do I want this person restored, or do I secretly want them permanently defined by what they did? Only you can answer that question. Because love, agape love, wants restoration. Paul wrote the church at Galatia with these words: brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. The word is restore. It is not destroy. It is not label. It is not discard. It is destroy. Maybe someone in your life has failed. Maybe it's a child. Maybe it's a spouse. Maybe it's a friend. They have disappointed you. Love does not ask you to pretend it didn't happen. But love does ask this: can I leave enough room in my heart for God to change them? Because there's not a person in this room, there is not a person in this room that wants God to define them forever by their worst moment. Love doesn't simply see someone who has been. Love asks, what will they become in the hands of God? Thirdly, love trusts because it looks through the eyes of Jesus. We had to come to Jesus because ultimately Jesus shows us what trusting love looks like. I mean, just consider the people in Jesus' life, the guys that he chose. Look at these guys. Peter was impulsive. Thomas doubted. James and John, they argued about who would be the greatest. Matthew was a traitor and a tax collector. Simon was a zealot. Judas betrayed him. I mean, what a list. We have people in this room I know who've studied leadership, who understand leadership, who understand hiring people to be on your team. If this list had been brought to you, you would say, go back and find some more. Jesus entrusted his mission to ordinary, imperfect people. I mean, let's just take a look at Peter. What a failure. And what's amazing, Jesus knew he was going to fail. In fact, in Luke 22, verse 31 through 32, Jesus said this to Peter, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat. But I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. Jesus knew Peter was going to deny him. Jesus knew Peter's future was going to have failure in it. But Jesus didn't say, if you come back. Jesus said, look at it, when you come back. Jesus saw something in Peter that Peter could not yet even see in himself. Then Peter denies Jesus 3 times at one of the most critical moments in Jesus' life. And the rooster crows. And Peter goes out, and what does he do? He weeps bitterly. And if you've ever been there, I've been there. And at that moment, I know what Peter was thinking. It's what I was thinking. It's all over. It's all over. That's where Peter was. And then Jesus comes to him, and 3 times he asks Peter this question, do you love me? 3 times. And then Jesus says this to that failing Peter, feed my sheep. I mean, think about that. Jesus entrusted his sheep to a man who just denied knowing him. Why? Because Jesus knew failure did not have to be Peter's final identity, and it doesn't have to be yours either. Jesus saw Peter through the eyes of redemption, and that's how he sees you. And Jesus does that with us. You know, this is where this really becomes personal. Because Paul tells the church at Corinth in 2 Corinthians what that means for you and I, this redemption. He says we are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. It's like God saying here, I've redeemed you, I love you, I see things in you you don't see in yourself, and I'm giving you the baton. And here's the baton. As you race forward, here's my gospel, here's my mission, here's my church, here's my reputation as Jesus in the world. I'm giving you responsibility because I believe in you. Take it to the world. He did that with Peter. He does that with you and with me. You know, there's an even deeper layer here. When Jesus is in Gethsemane, he prays, Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. Jesus knew everything was in front of him. Betrayal, mockery, beating, crucifixion, death. And yet Jesus said this, God, amongst all of this, I just trust you. I just trust you. Not my will, but your will. And then he says this, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. God, I trust you. Father, I trust you. This to the world looked like one of the greatest defeats in all of history. But it was God's greatest victory. The cross teaches us something. The cross teaches us that God's plan is being fulfilled in each of our lives. Sometimes we can't see it, but love always trusts. What I cannot understand, I've got to trust God. When someone I love has failed, I need to look for redemption. When I look at myself and wonder whether God could possibly still use me, I need to look back on Peter. The story of the man in front of you is your story and my story. His name is Mel Trotter. In the late 1800s, Mel Trotter had lost jobs. He had broken promises. He was an alcoholic. He had disappointed people who loved him. Again and again, he would promise that he was going to change. And again, church, Mel Trotter went back to drinking. Eventually, the people closest to him began to not believe in him. And then tragedy struck. His young son caught a disease and died. And Trotter was devastated. He later told this heartbreaking story. He took the shoes off of his son and he pawned them for a drink. Now, if you had known Mel Trotter then, what would you have thought? Took the shoes off his dead son and pawned them for a drink. In January of 1897, Trotter thought the same thing about himself that you were just thinking about him. He was wandering the streets of Chicago, drunk. He was broke. He was desperate. He was ready to take his life. When he walked past the Pacific Garden Mission, someone invited him inside. He didn't walk through those doors because he'd finally gotten his life together. He walked through those doors because he had no place else to go. And that night, Mel Trotter heard about a God who still loved broken people. A God who forgives the unforgivable. A man who now knew a God who could take the pieces of a ruined life and make it something new. And that night, Mel Trotter accepted Christ as his Lord and Savior. We could stop right there and say, what a great story. But the story doesn't end there. Mel Trotter moved to Michigan, to Grand Rapids, and within a few years, he'd given his life to a mission like the one he'd been saved in. He became superintendent of that mission. He helped people like him who were alcoholics, prisoners, homeless men, broken men, men whose families had stopped believing in their promises, men who'd stopped believing in themselves. Mel understood them. And for the rest of his life, he was dedicated to helping them. And before he died, Mel Trotter established 68 missions in cities across the United States, just like the one he'd been saved in. Thousands of people came to Christ. God doesn't want to just rescue you from something. Please listen to this. He wants to rescue you for something. Are you listening to me? God doesn't just want to rescue you from whatever you're struggling with right now. He wants to take that and use that for His kingdom to impact this world. And what evil meant for good, God is going to use to shake the foundations of hell. And He can do that in your life. I know in this room right now, there are people that are struggling. And you're thinking, I can never get past what I'm going through. And I'm telling you this morning that God can not only rescue you from that, but He can take you and He can change the world through your rescue. Are you open to let Him do that this morning?